Hello and welcome to another Raw Sport Quaran-Stream, the first one in a couple of weeks. Thank you for watching along if you are. And yeah, my name is Josh Sim, your Raw Head of Sport, and well, Raw Head of Sport for at least to the end of term, and then someone else will be taking over, which will be exciting. But yes, it is always a pleasure to be doing this show. As you can see, I've relocated, hopefully with a stronger Wi-Fi connection. Fingers crossed. We will see what happens. But obviously, there's a lot of football news to cover, a lot of fixtures to cover in the Fantasy Premier League terms. This is probably the biggest double game week. With I believe there's 16 fixtures going on between now and next Thursday, which is a lot. And yeah, 16 fixtures. I mean, fantasy speak, you wonder if Dean Smith has learnt anything about Fantasy Premier League since his players leaked the Jack Grealish injury, as people might know from last week. But yeah, obviously in the video description, our social media links are all there. If you're new, you can follow us on Instagram, on Twitter, where we kind of put clips of the show together. Obviously, our podcast feed as well, on Spotify, Google Podcasts, Apple, wherever you get your podcasts as well. We are on that. And yeah, I mean, that's without further, that's really it, to be honest with the intro. So without further ado, I'll bring on our guests, and it's only right I bring on the birthday boy, who is a stalwart of Raw Sport. He probably won't want me to tell everyone how old he is, but I'll bring him on anyway. Joe Spagnoli, happy birthday. Thank
you very much, Josh. Do you actually know how old I am today?
I could guess your birth year. I don't think I've ever asked. I don't think I know exactly. I could
23.
Guess. Okay.
23, which in terms of student radio is slight geriatric. But yeah, thank you very much for having me on. Very grateful that Raw Sport returns on my birthday. Looking forward to it.
Yeah, absolutely. 1998, right? Is that right?
Well done. You know maths.
Yeah. Well, yeah, you're a year older than me, so it's not. Yeah, so it's cool. We also have our sport deputy, obviously, who, as I'm sure, been watching how Man City have been doing this afternoon. Well, I mean, he'll be watching to make sure that United still have a chance in this title race, if there's a title race, that is. Ben Parkinson, hello.
Afternoon, Josh. Afternoon, Joe. Yeah, a lot has happened, definitely in terms of Man United's title race in the past 2 weeks. So yeah, can't wait to talk about that.
Yeah, I feel like we'll get into it, but a lot of teams have gone from, title contenders to, they might not make the top four in the space of 2 weeks. You could say that for a number of teams probably in the league. And also the opposite for some as well, in the case of Leicester and West Ham, they may be top four contenders. And finally, a debut on our channel. We sort of had a false debut for him last week, so really glad to have him on for real this time. Anton joins us. How are you?
Josh, yeah, really good, thanks. Happy birthday, Joe. Hi, Ben, as well. Good to be on for once. Nice to finally be on a proper stream. But yeah, looking forward to talk about it all again, and talking about City's form and the title race, as you say, is very fluctuative at the moment. So yeah, I reckon it'll be a good show.
Yeah, absolutely. And there is obviously one game going on at the moment for people who we are recording this on Saturday afternoon. For those who are catching this probably later in the day. At the time of recording, Manchester City lead West Ham 2-1, I believe. Just having a quick refresh. Yes, which that game is going to be coming to an end fairly soon. But Anton, I know you've been sort of keeping an eye on that game. Any thoughts on the game so far? Obviously, I sort of just mentioned the score there, but it's been fairly close from what I gather. And, West Ham have given it a fair go.
Yeah, I mean, West Ham have been absolutely fantastic in defence. Joe Cole mentioned it at half-time as well. Really, really solid team. They only switched off for that split second in the first half, which is what caused the goal. But I wouldn't put the defence at fault for that. It was a fantastic classic De Bruyne cross on this weak foot, just looped right over the defence. And I think it was Diaz who headed in for the first goal. But West Ham got straight back into it. playing really well still. They were unfortunate, I think, with the cross, John Stones. I mean, City are finding goals from everywhere, as we know these days, feeding in with a goal. But yeah, West Ham, really structural, really well, doing really well, keeping in the game. And I mean, they've got 4 minutes to find a solution if they want to, and I don't see them out of it just yet.
Yeah, and it's I mean, it just underlines how good this Man City team is. Obviously, pre-game, it was announced Raheem Sterling's on the bench. I don't know if he's even you'll be able to tell me if he's come on or not, but I know Sterling started on the bench. Cancelo, who's arguably been one of the best fullback in the country. Who else? Phil Foden's on the bench as well. So a few big names. Obviously, they were able to bring Aguero in for his first start in a while. So depth-wise, this team is a scary prospect for sure. And yeah, I mean, since you've been watching the game, how have you sort of seen? I imagine it's been seamless, isn't it? No one's sort of looked out of place in this team.
Totally, but that's the reason why I think they are where they are in the Premier League this season. I mean, you look at them. There's not one weak player in that side, and they're not even playing their starting lineup, right? I mean, there's a classic Man City game at the moment, and as you say, Sterling, I don't think has come on yet, unless I missed it. But Foden came on, made a bit of a difference, but it's, as you say, completely seamless. They might as well be starting their first team, even with the weakened subs. Then it's scary that Aguero's been missing all this time, and suddenly he comes in today. He hasn't scored or anything, but the fact that they've maintained their form all the way through that injury, yeah, it's quite amazing, as you say, and a seamless difference.
Yeah, Ben, I mean, just now, I guess moving away from this game to just in general looking at City over the past week or couple of weeks, I mean, there's not a lot you can really say other than they've been very, very good, and they've sort of been in sort of a season where teams have hit their highs and lows very quickly, and it's sort of been a roller coaster. They've been the outlier and have been just strong throughout this whole period. And as a team, as a fan of a team who hoped to, create a bit of a title race, and obviously there was a bit of buzz that this could be the most competitive title race in a while, is it disheartening to see this juggernaut just roll on and push for what would be, I guess, I might need to check this, like the third title in 4 years or something, 2 titles in 3 years, something along those lines.
Yeah, no, I think in my mind, the title race is done now. I think City have won it. They're far ahead. And of course, as a Manchester United fan, that does hurt a little bit. But I think it's not like it's not deserved. And in my mind, Manchester United, and we'll probably talk about it later, were never really in the title race. They just happened to be in second or first in that moment in time. But City looks so strong, and it's really, I think it's been talked about all season. We've definitely talked about it on this show before. It's just the solid base. They're doing exactly the same as what they did last season, but with a solid base in defence. And Ruben Dias, who obviously got on the score sheet today, is a massive part of that. And, we then also kind of talk about John Stones and the revitalisation of John Stones. I'd go as far to say this is just the vitalisation of John Stones. I think he's never been in the form that he's currently in. And of course, Ruben Dias has helped that. Ruben Dias has almost provided sort of a fresh start, a blank slate for John Stones to establish a new partnership. And then now it seems like they've got that defensive base. They kind of just switch around. Laporte can come in there and do a job. So, it almost seems like they've got options kind of covered everywhere in the pitch this season, including centre-back, which they obviously didn't have last season. Obviously, the ability to mix and match up front as well has been crucial for them. We've just talked about that today, how Raheem Sterling hasn't come on yet, but Phil Foden's come off the bench, and they're still starting with world-class players. I read Michael Richards' Sky Sports article when he said that if City go out there and sign Diego Costa, then they will, because he was available, then they will win the title by having a striker. Whereas I think Pep Guardiola's kind of proven that statement wrong by saying we don't actually need a striker, because, I mean, Jesus, the amount of times he's been available and not started, obviously Aguero's been out as well. So, I mean, it's just really been sort of like a masterclass by Pep Guardiola. He's had this plan all along. They develop consistency in all areas of the pitch, and that's led to the sheer domination. And I think, no one else is really going to get next nor near to that, because everyone else is so unbelievably up and down and inconsistent in their form. And Manchester City seem to be unbelievably consistent at the moment. They were just waiting for that click, and now they've clicked. I don't think there's going back, and I have no sort of fear in retracting my statement on needing to when I say I think the title race is done.
Yeah, certainly feels that way. And Joe, you and I at the start of the season, I think the game that stands out was that Leicester 5-3 City, wasn't it? It was that game where Leicester seemed to run riot, and obviously, there were unbelievable performances from Leicester's players, but also it was typified by Man City allowing Leicester to get in behind them and create so many chances. And you think back to then and you look now, they've managed to turn it around, and it feels like defensively it's been the biggest strides. I mean, obviously their attack has kind of continued to be pretty much firing on all cylinders, but it's that transformation in the back and the revitalization of players like John Stones, as Ben said, and the addition of Ruben Dias that has really made the City team like a really scary one to beat now.
I mean, is it just me, or has the City dominance of the Premier League kind of come somewhat unexpected this year? I think the slow start to the season definitely helped with that. I still remember the day when they lost 5-3 against Leicester and Timothy Castagne single-handedly tore the team apart. I was doing team of the season for the top 5 European leagues just for fun a few weeks ago, and I was quite shocked when I concluded that Ruben Dias is actually my MVP for the Premier League so far this season. I remember Gary Neville was talking about the Manchester United centre-backs and how their biggest weakness is each other. With Man City, it's the opposite. The reason John Stones and by extension João Cancelo have been so much better this year is just because of the Ruben Dias effect coming in. So far, he's proven me and so many others wrong. He's been, at least in terms of net performance, worth that money. Yes, it's exactly what Man City always do, splash the cash on a centre-back. They get worse within a couple of years. But hey, if it wins you the Premier League 3 out of 4 seasons, then clearly it works. The one player that we haven't mentioned so far, who again has made my team of the season unexpectedly, is Ilkay Gundogan. I was very surprised when City signed him a few years ago. He's never really been a crucial part of the team, but in recent weeks, especially with Jose Mourinho's 3rd season coming 1 year early, he's overtaken Pierre-Emile Højbjerg for me as the most impressive holding midfielder in the Premier League this season. It's just so nice to see that, irrespective of their lack of a striker, because as Ben said, Gabriel Jesus is simply too unreliable to function as a reliable starter for them. Man City's strong defensive foundation is what has, for me, won this Premier League already.
Yeah, it's hard to disagree with that. And yeah, when you have a strong defense, your attack, I mean, in this league, it seems like a strong defense gets you really far. You look at teams like, say, Burnley, and obviously Sheffield United last year showed that. And then couple that with a really good attack, Anton. Even they've had De Bruyne injured for spells this season. He's not been available all season. Aguero, obviously, we talked about, his first start today in a long time. Gabriel Jesus has not really kicked on as much as people would have hoped. He's not really taken his chance. You've seen players like Mahrez kind of come in and out, Foden come in and out, sort of a mix of players, and yet they still manage to find a way to succeed. In a system sometimes that goes without a striker, a system that sometimes goes with a false nine, it's almost as if they've been able to find plan B, C, and D to beat a team, which is really impressive given the season and COVID and all that kind of stuff as well.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Totally agreed. And as I mentioned at the start, they're not just able to find goals from their strikers and the midfielders at the moment, or the wingers. John Stones has contributed a fair share of times. It's the reason why I put him in my fantasy team recently. He seems to contribute. That Diaz scores today. But then, as you mentioned, I think City, as you say, have been perhaps slightly weaker. We say weak. I mean, City's bench at the moment is world class, right? But you look at the defensive unit they have, which has kept them alive, and then you sort of look at Liverpool, who have lost that defensive unit but can't go and attack with their front three because they're completely off. I think the key thing for City is that even where their forward line has not been perhaps so potent as it has been in the past, the defense has kept them alive. They're still able to move forward and still able to control, dominate, and win games and collect points that are going to take them to the title. As Ben said, I think the title's finished as well. But yeah, they're a complete unit now, right? They, even going forward, where they don't have their strikers, they still have the players to create the goals, to create the chances, and ultimately get the results that they need to take them to the Premier League title.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'm just going to bring on Luke James as well, the editor of the Ball Sports section. Luke, I did want to ask you, I mean, you've presumably just come off the game, the City-West Ham game that I think is finished 2-1, and you'll be able to correct me if I'm wrong. From a West Ham perspective, I mean, actually no. From you're a West Ham fan, obviously watching City, this juggernaut of City. How did you find watching them today?
City were great to get today. I think kind of if you were to rate them out of 10 on kind of the performance today versus performances so far this season, I think I'd give them a 7. They were great, but that's what you kind of come to expect from Man City. The goals, I'm not really sure if you've discussed them yet, but the first was a really sensational kind of cross from Kevin De Bruyne, kind of cut inside from the right hand side, whipped it towards the far post, and it was a great header in the first half. The second goal came off the second phase, off of a corner, which City probably shouldn't have really been able to win in the first place. And again, it was really well worked. Played the ball out wide to Mahrez, played the ball into John Stones and scored. It wasn't vintage City kind of in terms of the attacking side of the play. But what I would say is once they got ahead for the second time, they really controlled the tempo of the game kind of perfectly. West Ham, besides from a last second chance from a City up, didn't really have an opportunity to kind of find a second goal. So yeah, I think if it wasn't already clear that City were going to win the league, kind of the extent to which they controlled the second half will certainly say that they're on track to do so.
Yeah, it does. It's just another win. It's another example of them just kind of flexing on the Premier League pretty much on their really strong winning streak at the moment. And yeah, I feel like Joe, you mentioned you feel Diaz is the player of the Premier League so far for you then?
Yeah, I think in terms of net impact, there's definitely an argument for a few. So Mo Salah for Liverpool, what's left of the Liverpool European push, and of obviously Bruno Fernandes for Manchester United as well. But if you're just looking at the defensive overhaul, I mean, in the last 2 seasons when Man City won the Premier League, I said their defence was maybe the weakest of the top 5 league winners in both of those years. I thought they had fundamental problems even with Aymeric Laporte. This year, that simply isn't the case. Ruben Diaz has just been exceptional. And again, he's proven me wrong above everyone else.
Yeah, the only reason I ask is I just want to go around the panel and see, do we all concur that the Premier League player of the season so far is a Man City player? And if so, which City player? So, Ben, I'll start with you. Do you think, is it a City player that for you that you'd say is player of the season, and who would it be if so?
Yeah, I think I have to agree with Joe. I mean, I think he explained the options there. I think Gundogan's had obviously recently really good run of form, but I still just think, you're looking at that impact. It just has to be Ruben Diaz. Bruno Fernandes has been amazing as well. So I mean, Portugal looking really good with João Cancelo, but I think Ruben Diaz probably just tops it because of how far ahead City are and how much they're dominating at the moment.
Yeah, Anton, do you agree, or is there another name you'd throw in there?
No, I totally agree with those options as well. I would personally go with Bruno Fernandes. I've seen a lot more of United this season than I have of City. And I think you look at the United team, as we said before, I think it was Ben who mentioned it, United just happened to be first or second in the title. I don't think they were really going to challenge at any point. But I think the impact Fernandes has had on that team is I mean, you can't really count it as you look at Rashford's been there for years, Martial's been there for years. Those transfers didn't really have any effect in my eyes, but Bruno Fernandes has completely come in and revolutionised that team. Every week he seems to come up with an assist, a free kick, a goal, something or the other, and I think for that reason he's my player of the season so far.
Yeah, fair enough. I mean, Luke, with Fernandes and Diaz, obviously both Portuguese, but those are both signings that I guess those teams have been waiting for so long. You think about United, obviously after. And I don't want to go too far back, but obviously Ronaldo left, and then they brought in a host of players, star players, Di Maria, that comes to mind. I'm sure there's another one. Maybe I'm just thinking of Di Maria. But obviously looking at the City side, they've had Mangala, they've had Otamendi, they've obviously spent a lot of money to find a centre back, and here they are with a young one who they've probably found for the future, at least for the next 5, maybe 10 years or so. Where do you stand on who is a City player the front runner to be player of the year, and if so, which one? Or is it Bruno Fernandes, who's obviously had a very good season at United?
For me, it's definitely a Manchester City player. Anyone else, I think kind of the gap at the top is so large that it just has to be someone from Manchester City. There are 4 potentially that I think could win it for them. The 2 centre-backs, Stones and Diaz, have been brilliant. I think Stones, typically with the way that awards are given out, part of the reason why the player wins it is because of the narrative. And I think John Stones, in terms of the way these awards are given, has a very, very easy narrative to award. I mean, he's someone who went from kind of being an outcast at the club to being kind of central to their plan. So I think he's definitely up there. Phil Foden has been brilliant. And again, he's a young English guy. So that's something that's going to appeal in terms of giving out these awards. And the other one for me as well, based on his recent form, would be Gundogan, because he's been so excellent at the right time. I mean, kind of a lot of the time we prioritise the stuff that happens in the second half of the season. And since January, kind of back into December, he's been one of the best players in the league. So yeah, I think Manchester City have to win this award in terms of one of their players. I think any of those four stand a really good chance. And again, that's not even in mentioning someone like Kevin De Bruyne, who's obviously just come back from injury too. So there's lots of different options for them.
Yeah, absolutely. And I was actually going to ask about manager of the year, but I feel like that's a much more contested category than that. So I'll leave that one for now. I mean, all of your answers suggest that everyone thinks City's going to win the title now, right? Am I sort of right in that? So I mean, it's a good time to segue. Well, we can look at their Champions League game. Obviously, they played in midweek. They beat Borussia Mönchengladbach 2-0 in the first leg. Do we feel like they are the front runners for the Champions League as well? I'll go around the horn. Anton, what do you reckon? Do you reckon City? I don't know how much of the game you watched, but do you feel like City, given their form, that it puts them in the front seat to kind of win the Champions League as well?
Well, I mean, I personally think so. I was sort of thinking about it before the show, who would be the front runner for me. I think City are just such a dominant block at the moment. They can basically play a second team in the Premier League. They've got the title in the bag. They just have to win a couple more games and then sort of just push on in the Champions League. I think it was Darren Bent who mentioned it on TalkSport earlier this week. Pep Guardiola normally has to think about the Premier League. He has to think about something else, the FA Cup or the League Cup, and then comes to the Champions League. This season, I really think he can just say, let's really focus on that. Let's really go for that now. And I think, not just for the Champions League, I think they're the front runners. I think they're the front runners for all four tournaments they're still involved in. I think obviously you have to look at Bayern. PSG had very impressive results in the week. PSG 4-1 against Barca. Barca aren't playing great at the moment, but Mbappe looks unstoppable. So perhaps them this year with Pochettino as well, perhaps a new injection of energy for them. But I think, for me, as much as I hate to say it as a Liverpool fan, I think City are going to take, for sure, the Premier League. They look like Champions League winners for me, and they could well go on to do the four competitions.
Yeah, it does feel. Certainly it feels like they're the strongest English team left in the Champions League, for sure. Given what we said about the Premier League, it does make that makes sense. But yeah, Ben, what are your thoughts on this? Do you feel like because we talked about last year how few teams, Liverpool and Bayern being an exception, kind of had a model of consistency throughout 2020 calendar-wise. It does feel like 2021 so far it's sort of City have sort of taken on that mantle. And yeah, does that make them the front runners to win the Champions League in, I can't remember what city it is, but win the Champions League?
Yeah, I think theoretically, yeah, and I agree with everything of what Anton said. But I also just think there's just this psychological block with City and PSG that with the Champions League. Pep always kind of overcomplicates it in some games as well. So theoretically, on paper, the results they're getting on the pitch, the results they're getting in the Premier League, in the past, that's not mattered. City still haven't made it, really. I can't remember exactly, but I don't even think they've made it to the semis. So in that sense, I'm not sure. I think obviously, Bayern Munich look really good, but the problem with Bayern Munich is how many teams have kind of won it 2 years on the bounce. Not very many. It's a very difficult thing to do, very difficult to keep the motivation levels up. Even, psychologically, it's just almost impossible to reach the same motivation you had last year for Bayern Munich's perspective. So I think the thing that's in City's favour is the amount of teams out of form. That's just as much as the amount of them being in form that I think could make, this the first Champions League win for Manchester City. But still, I think people underestimate this psychological block. It's something, you know, it's unconscious, you're not aware of it. And, you know, I study psychology. There's a massive restraint on them if they can go and do that. And I think that's what would make Ruben Dias such an amazing signing, because sometimes it can be a fresh face, a fresh perspective that comes in and allows you to get over that hurdle. But I still question, is it enough, just one player kind of changing the whole dynamics of not just a squad, the whole dynamics of a club? So theoretically, yes, but I think they've got a lot of sort of mental training and mental preparation to do before these games if they want to stand a chance of getting through.
Yeah, and full disclosure, we'll just have the results up. Bayern, as you guys have alluded to, they obviously beat Lazio 4-1, which is a performance I personally didn't really see coming, because they've sort of had troubles in the league, which has been interesting. But also, you mentioned PSG, obviously a big win at the Nou Camp, or the Camp Nou, however you call it. Big win, as you guys have said. Mbappe had an electric performance. And I've just worked out the Champions League finals at Istanbul, so that's doubly bad if City go to Istanbul, because as Anton knows, it kind of rips away that narrative from Liverpool. But Luke, I know you guys at the Ball Sport, you guys did a podcast previewing these Champions League games. Now that, you know, they've all, at least the first legs have all come to an end, and we'll talk about individually Liverpool, Leipzig, and Chelsea, Atletico, and in just a bit. But focusing on as a whole, I mean, City, would you say, are the front runners based on the evidence of the first round ties of the round of 16?
I think there are still three teams that are still relatively close together. I think City, PSG, and Bayern Munich are the three. The reason why I still have it as the three, I think PSG were so impressive against Barcelona. I get Barcelona on kind of at the highest ebb at the moment, but still 4-1 against them is impressive. Of course, you mentioned Bayern Munich. They look pretty good at the minute. I mean, that's probably an understatement, but they've had some inconsistent results in the Bundesliga. And then, of course, you have Manchester City, who were drawn against Borussia Mönchengladbach, who, of course, losing the manager at the end of the season. So it's a tricky situation for them too. So, yeah, City are definitely in the conversation this year. And I think one of the reasons why they are in a slightly different place to usual is because Guardiola has managed his squad so effectively this year. And I think that's the thing that has separated Manchester City in the Premier League with teams like Liverpool. Of course, Liverpool have been ravaged by injury, but I think the way that Pep Guardiola has gone about managing how congested the fixture list is has ultimately kind of put them a number of points ahead. So yeah, I think if they can continue to keep that lead up in the Premier League, it will give them the opportunity to rotate. And again, they rotated today. And it sounds ridiculous to say that they rotated today, but City had £305 million worth of player on the bench today. So if you can keep that level of squad rotation up, there's no reason to say that they can't, in a season as bizarre as this, go all the way in Europe, because it's a different kind of season. So yeah, I think City are definitely up there. I think the whole narrative about them kind of being not able to do it on the biggest stage, I think we might be seeing the end of that, because this is a huge opportunity for them.
Yeah, and I'm trying to find that quote of what Pep Guardiola said earlier this week. Some of you may know it. I think it was I think he was asked why are they so good at the moment, and he just said because we had the money to buy the players, or something along those lines. Which, Joe, I mean, you must love that quote. Hearing Pep Guardiola basically flex about how they have money to spend on really good players. I know he was trying to downplay his impact, but it did come across as a bit like, yeah, wouldn't we all want to be in that situation? But yeah, I mean, we'll look at sort of. Yeah, as we said, we'll look about the other English teams in just a bit. But yeah, Joe, I mean, any final thoughts? Again, given, you know, we've covered on this podcast, we've talked about Barcelona and their inefficiencies, and they were exposed against PSG. We've talked about Juventus and their issues as well. And the Pirlo reign hasn't gone quite as seamlessly. And Real Madrid and Zidane, even that hasn't gone kind of as well as hoped. What are your thoughts on the front runners for the Champions League at the moment?
I mean, I didn't watch a huge amount of the City game against Gladbach. I didn't think they were that impressive, honestly. However, in the light of Gladbach's current situation with losing Marco Rose at the end of the year, I don't think it's that important. It's funny that all three of the guys who've spoken already have come to different conclusions, and yet I agree with everything that every single one of them said. The psychological block on Man City. Bear in mind how embarrassingly they've bottled it in the last few years, even with stronger teams on paper. Can't be understated. However, what I'd say is different this year isn't just the fact that it's a really odd season with the COVID-19 pandemic. It's the fact that what makes this Man City team great is not what made the Man City teams of 2 and 3 years ago great. This is not a team with fundamental defensive flaws. This isn't a team that's overwhelmingly stacked in attack. You know, this team has looked depleted going forward for a lot of this season, and yet they've still kept the goals going in. That defensive foundation might just be about to change it for Man City. I still don't think they're favourites, because I agree with what Ben said. I fundamentally don't believe that Pep Guardiola is simple enough to manage teams at their best in the Champions League. His record over the last 5 or 6 years proves that to the letter. However, they have come back into the conversation for me because the team I was predicting would win it, Atletico Madrid, who again are based on strong defensive football, put in an absolute 2 out of 10 performance against Chelsea, despite being at home. Yeah, they were absolutely awful. I mean, Bayern are in the conversation, obviously, and I think PSG, especially after last year and Pochettino losing it with Spurs a couple of years ago, they can't be underestimated either. But Jesus Christ, Atletico Madrid was so bad, and for me, that's taken them out of the picture altogether.
I don't know if you told me you were going for Atletico. Well, you had picked Atletico to win the Champions League, but I'm not surprised, and you are right. We will actually. It's a good transition into Chelsea in just a second, and thanks Luke for getting the quote up. It's that first line really. We have a lot of money to buy a lot of incredible players. That's how he opened it. And yeah, he goes on to praise his players basically, but that line is just, yeah, it's line of a manager whose club is owned by just a Arabian prince royalty, pretty much. Let's go and we'll talk about Chelsea, actually. I'm just trying to think if there's anything else I wanted to say about City Gladbach. Obviously, we've seen City, as you guys alluded to, they mucked it up against Lyon last year, it's fair to say. In a one-legged tie, we would have all picked City, and Lyon found a way. Obviously, Liverpool and Spurs obviously knocked them out in two-legged ties as well. So there's obviously a chance that, something happens. But yeah, they look pretty strong, along with Bayern and PSG for sure. Yeah, since Joe mentioned it, let's talk about Chelsea, and let's talk about. I mean, we can talk about the Atletico Chelsea tie if you want. First of all, Luke, I know you guys previewed the game as I sort of alluded to. Did the game go as planned? Well, not as planned, but as how you thought about it heading into it, or were you disappointed by Atletico's kind of lack of initiative per se to kind of push the English club in the first leg?
Yeah, I was really disappointed by the way Atletico set up, because what we hear a lot in the British press is that Atletico are just this defensive team that play the Simeone way, and there's a very set idea of what that is. But over the past kind of 12 to 18 months, Atletico have changed, they've evolved, become better offensively, and they've become kind of set up to play in that style. And then you get to the game against Chelsea. Of course, they had a bad result at the weekend before the Chelsea game, and they just set up so defensively. At times, it was kind of like a 6-3-1 with both kind of wingers sitting really, really deep in line with the defence. And it just gave Chelsea a really easy opportunity to come and dominate possession as they kind of wanted to do. It's important to say Atletico did have good chances. They had one really good chance in particular, but it was a really low XG game in general, so it wasn't a game kind of attacking play at both ends. So I think if Atletico in the second leg take the game to Chelsea, there's definitely a chance that they could turn it back. And kind of I agreed with Joe's analysis in the first place. Before this first leg, I would have put Atletico in that conversation with PSG, Bayern and City, but they were just so disappointed against Chelsea. What you've got to say, to give Chelsea their credit, is already only kind of a month into the reign of Thomas Tuchel, they look so tactically aware, so tactically set up, and they just know their jobs. And I think it's really impressive that Tuchel's come in and given them such a clear identity within such a short space of time. This isn't, of course, the end game for Chelsea. Chelsea have lots of areas where they need to improve. They need to get better in the final third. But what he has done is he's made them incredibly difficult to beat, because they look good defensively. They control the ball well in the midfield, but they're not quite connecting kind of in the final third. So in the second leg, I believe it's being played at Stamford Bridge. It's a big opportunity for Atletico to show that, yeah, we are more than this 6-3-1 team. And I think the only way in which they're going to achieve that is if Simeone sets up as he normally would in La Liga this year, because Chelsea aren't the juggernauts that I think that Simeone just gave them far too much respect, because Chelsea aren't in the conversation to win this competition, and Atletico were. So in the second leg, if Atletico take the game to Chelsea, anything could happen. If we see something similar to last time, then I think Chelsea have definitely got the upper hand there, because, as I say, the game just very much played into what Thomas Tuchel was probably hoping for.
Yeah, and just sort of moving the conversation, I guess, from that game to kind of just the last 2 weeks. I don't know how. I believe we've only talked since we did that sort of bonus Quaran-Stream when Tuchel was announced, or Tuchel was announced rather. I don't think we've had a chance to kind of evaluate his time at Chelsea so far. Ben, I mean, it's interesting because I sort of come to the conclusion that if Chelsea was still managed by Frank Lampard, I imagine Simeone would have given it a bit more of a go. I don't know if you disagree with that or not, but certainly Tuchel's done a lot to improve, and as Luke sort of alluded to, we knew he would have a fair big of a say in how Chelsea attacked going forward. But defensively, they've looked really, really solid. And you've seen the likes of Marcos Alonso, who kind of gone from persona non grata to kind of back into the team again, and pushing out Ben Chilwell, who obviously they spent a lot of money on, and Antonio Rudiger was also sort of fourth choice at a point. Now he's become a first choice player again. It's quite interesting to see him slowly kind of just make those changes. Obviously, he knows he'll have a transfer window where presumably they'll have a lot of money to spend, but it's interesting to see these changes already in the space of what's been 1 or 2 months already.
Yeah, no, I think he's done really well considering, the fixture congestion. I think we talked about before, like there's not actually as much time on the training pitch this year as you would have. So I think in that sense, he's definitely done really well. I agree with what you said. If Frank Lampard was there, Simeone would have probably gone for it more, because I think any club, if Frank Lampard was the manager, would have gone for it more because they have the right to. So yeah, I agree in that sense. And Marcos Alonso, I mean, this is a player who I'm unbelievably confused about, because I've never seen someone be so effective in the wing-back position, but so bad in a full-back position. I remember watching him at full-back and thinking that is the perfect list of everything of what not to do if you play full-back. But then he's been really effective. Yeah, Rudiger's looked solid. And I think the thing is, he's come in here and worked from the ground up. And I think, by playing maybe that 5 at the back, and we spoke a lot before about sort of the 4-2-3-1 formation that he favours, he's actually come in with this other system. And I think he's really kind of assessed his squad, realised maybe the current players that he's got and he's not going to change. This is the best way to move forward. And then I think on top of that, it allows him to sort of, if he has this base, he can go and he can ask his front players different things, try things with his front men, because really, we were looking under Frank Lampard and we were thinking it's probably defensive coaching that really let him down. So if Tuchel can come in and just sort of sort that out, and then maybe kind of slowly integrate his attacking ideas, let players like Werner find his feet a bit with what he wants to do and things. So I think from that perspective, I mean, that's certainly what I think he's done, something similar to that anyway, that has been really positive for him. A run like this obviously does end. We've all seen when a new manager comes in, there is a honeymoon period. We don't know the extent to which this is a honeymoon period or not. So what I'd say is for them, it's just probably trying to make sure that maybe if they do lose a game, it's a blip and then they get straight back on the way, because I don't think, the position that Chelsea are in the league, and obviously if they want to go a little bit further in the Champions League, they can't afford to have those blips. So hopefully, for them, they can just keep on going consistently. But yeah, I've been really impressed with the way he's managed them. All the players seem to be there and fighting. And, I think Hudson-Odoi deserves a mention as well, because he actually did really well coming in, although that was a bit odd maybe in the week when he got subbed off for counter-pressing. Because if anyone watched the analysis for that, he actually did counter-press on every single occasion. So I'm not sure that was the real reason. But yeah, apart from that, I think, yeah, very, very good man management, very good tactically. Looks to be, really quite positive atmosphere around Chelsea at the moment.
Yeah, and certainly, obviously, we haven't mentioned yet, obviously, Olivier Giroud scored a bicycle kick that was obviously initially ruled out for offside and then overturned, but still showing just how, he's had, certainly if you look at his Champions League performances this year, he's had a phenomenal season. He scored a hat-trick earlier this season, didn't he, in one of the group stage matches. So, and it's been interesting how he's sort of chosen strikers as well. I know, there's rumours that Tammy Abraham's sort of discontent with how it's sort of panned out. Obviously, Timo Werner's still yet to fully bed in. It's sort of been a bit of a feeling out process in terms of the attack and to a certain extent the midfield as well. Anton, I know we haven't had you on before, so I was just curious to know what are your thoughts on Chelsea at the moment. Just how do you perceive them?
So I mean, I was going to say I hadn't seen much of Chelsea this season, but I was initially a bit disappointed when Frank Lampard had been sacked. I understood why it happened, but looking at it now, I'm just looking at the most recent results, and it does seem to be a turn for the better. I was also watched that bit about Hudson-Odoi coming off slightly early, or I think it was he had come on and got resubbed off, which was a bit disappointing to see, really. But I think, as Ben said, everything seems to be a positive atmosphere around Chelsea at the moment. I think as well, the key thing that Tuchel might want to sort out eventually is going forward. The front line, there never seems to be a consistency with Chelsea's front three. As I say, I haven't seen much of them, but I'd forgotten that Ziyech was part of the team. Really, but as in, yeah, that defense seems a lot more solid than it had been before. I was a bit interested to see Alonso coming through. I think he scored a goal in the first Tuchel game, so we'll see how that goes and whether Tuchel can reestablish his position in the team. But yeah, going forward, Chelsea looks solid, and again, a force that I think maybe had perhaps diminished a little bit under Frank Lampard, but I think was back on the way back up anyways.
Yeah, I 100% agree, and I feel like with Tuchel, I mean, certainly in the Champions League, that's an elite manager that you could put against the other 15 best teams in Europe and be confident in, because he's someone who's obviously game plans for this and thinks about this and is able to get through all of this. And we will. I mean, let's talk a bit about they've obviously in the Premier League they've had solid games. They haven't really been tested, but they will be this week because they've got Man United tomorrow and then Liverpool on Thursday. So it doesn't get any tougher than that with those two games in a short space of time. I mean, yeah, we have two fans of United, Liverpool, so we can sort of do an opposition preview here. But Ben, starting with you tomorrow, are you worried about Chelsea tomorrow? What are your thoughts on that game?
Yeah, I think I am worried. I think it's not a good time to play Chelsea, as I said before, whether this is a honeymoon period or just like Chelsea kind of being like really consistent now for the long run. Either way, it's just not a good time for Manchester United to play them, especially with some of the injuries that they have. And I think that, the Manchester United's midfield of just kind of Matic and Fred and then waiting to see if others are fit really doesn't look very strong or filmy with much confidence whatsoever. So in that sense, yeah, I am really nervous for the game. It's going to be an interesting one, though, because I don't think I can outright sort of call it. I think on paper, I kind of believe that Chelsea will win. I think they have a stronger squad. I think they're in a better kind of phase at the moment. But then again, I think, there's so many times in the past where Manchester United have just turned up and surprised us. Ultimately, I don't think they're as good as Chelsea, actually. But then again, Tuchel's had a lot less time at the club. So it'll be interesting to see what happens in that game. But I think, yeah, Manchester United, I was saying before, if they really were going to challenge for the title, then Sheffield United, that loss had to be a one-off, had to be a blip, and you had to go again. And I think, it's not just that they did kind of stumble and get points taken off them in the next couple of games. The performances just weren't there. They're not a title-winning team. They're not good enough. There's a bunch of key positions that need addressing. I think there's, coaching positions that need addressing, because I think, I've been very, very heavily critical of Ole Gunnar Solskjaer on this show. And I think if he... Quite clearly, everyone knows this. He's not the most tactically astute manager in the world. And I think that's fine if you appoint coaches who are. Whereas we've got coaches, two of our coaches are Darren Fletcher and Michael Carrick. They really haven't been doing it for long. And that's not to say they won't make brilliant coaches, but they've barely been in the game as a coach. So I think in that sense, they've got to either recruit some more coaches, or Ollie's got to improve on his tactical sense, because they've actually lost to the big teams quite a lot this year. Another reason of why I'm not filled in for confidence tomorrow. So I think, from that sense, whilst Ole Gunnar Solskjaer does really well in terms of man management, handling the press, all of that stuff, either he or he needs to delegate, and the club need to appoint some better coaches. They need to improve tactically and in a number of areas on the pitch to mount the title challenge. And I think I spoke about this definitely with Joe on the podcast or show we did when Frank Lampard was sacked. And Chelsea's squad is better than Manchester United's. I 100% believe that. It definitely is. So I think the phase that Chelsea are in and that on the cards as well, probably means that I think Chelsea will probably come away with a win. Maybe it'll be a draw, but I can't see a Manchester United win tomorrow, unfortunately.
I'm saddened that that's a conclusion you've come up with for you. Joe, I mean, I turn to you, sort of the neutral for this game. I mean, this is probably the biggest game of the weekend, so we can start putting a bit of focus into it. But like, again, as you know, obviously these two teams, we should say United obviously got, I think it was a goalless draw against Real Sociedad, so that means they are through 4-0 on aggregate. Mikel Oyarzabal with a really bad penalty miss, but we'll gloss over that one. United have been in decent form, obviously beat Newcastle most recently in the Premier League 3-1, and then that came after a 1-1 draw at West Brom, which kind of highlights that inconsistency. But yeah, Joe, what are your thoughts about Chelsea coming up against Man United? Ben's highlighted sort of, I don't want to say there's a gulf between the two managers, but certainly in tactical knowledge, and you sort of feel that certainly. But at the same time, this United team continue to surprise people, and Ole Gunnar Solskjaer was seemingly on borrowed time and is now seemingly kind of secured himself for at least for a while until people start doubting him again. What are your thoughts on the game?
Well, just to briefly digress away and back home for me is that I wonder how much focus Ole Gunnar Solskjaer is going to be putting into the Europa League in the near future over the Premier League. I think Manchester United on form and the teams that are left have to be in contention for winning the whole thing. And obviously they've drawn AC Milan in the round of 16. They have been seriously off the boil in the last few weeks. This is the best possible time to face that side. Stefano Pioli has had some really bizarre squad selections and tactical errors. So I would not be surprised if Man United were saving for the first leg to absolutely put Milan to the sword and then focus on the Premier League again afterwards. Going into this game, I honestly think this has got a draw written all over it, whether that's a draw, a score draw or a ball draw. The real duel in this game is going to be Harry Maguire and Timo Werner, two players who I genuinely believe are great. It's just we haven't seen the best of them this year for various reasons. I actually think Liverpool are going to be much easier to break down than Manchester United on paper. We've seen how much Liverpool can press if you look at heat maps this year as a result of their centre-back injury crisis. So they go an awful lot more compact. That is the absolute perfect time for, as Anton says, getting a front three together, learning how to integrate those attacks from those wide areas of Chelsea. Manchester United, I don't think, is going to have that same opportunity. If Harry Maguire and Victor Nilsson-Lindelöf or any other combination of centre-backs turn up, they can stop Chelsea. I'm absolutely convinced. However, as we've said already, Chelsea are also very difficult to beat. So failing a few set pieces, I wouldn't be surprised if this ended up 0-0.
Yeah, I mean, on United's side, obviously there's a lot of fitness concerns around who is it? McTominay. Ben will be able to correct me if I'm wrong. McTominay, Fred, and Cavani, isn't it? The sort of the injury doubts at the moment. Obviously, and it's interesting, Anton, because obviously this is, Cavani and Thiago Silva obviously played together a lot at PSG. So there's that interesting subplot of both knowing each other's games. And yeah, this is, I think United came away with the win last time, correct me if I'm wrong, last season against Chelsea. So I think they've won at that ground before. What are you're sort of a neutral. I'm guessing you're hoping for a draw because that's good for Liverpool, I guess. But what are your thoughts on those two teams kind of going head to head?
Yeah, again, as you said, a draw would be ideal for me. It gives Liverpool a higher chance of getting into the top four this season. But I think you can't count out United on this one. I think Joe is completely right in saying that it could well be a ball draw. It could be a draw full of goals and full of action. But I can see Chelsea having a bit of lenience here going forward. I think they're rebuilding again. They have the chance to go and capitalise on United's current weakness. I think Joe's point as well, that United might look a bit weaker this weekend for the sake of saving for next week's Europa League draw. But yeah, I'm interested to see what the result will be. I think it'll be a good game. I think Chelsea will really go for it. I think United will sit back a little bit more and try and catch on the counter. The tie between Cavani and Thiago Silva, I'm interested to see how that turns out. But I'm not entirely sure where Thiago Silva fits into the Chelsea side at the moment. I think if I'm not wrong, I'm looking at the current Chelsea sides and the back three doesn't seem to incorporate him. But we'll see where that goes. Perhaps he incorporates Thiago Silva just to be able to get a defence against Cavani. But as I say, going to be a close game. But I think perhaps Chelsea nab it on the fact that their current form is a little bit better than United.
Yeah, and Luke, I just wanted to, I mean, there were two things tactically that sort of come to mind. First of all, you know, not to harp on Thiago Silva's sort of age and his pace sort of diminishing, but United have a very quick attack. Martial's obviously very quick, Rashford's very quick. If he plays Mason Greenwood, I know he's in and out of team, but obviously he's very quick as well. So that could pose issues, and especially if Alonso goes forward and leaves a whole lot of space at the back, that's ideal for a Manchester United team. And obviously, the other one is the battle in midfield, because obviously we've seen Chelsea sort of solidify Kovacic and Jorginho, and Mount have sort of formed that three for Chelsea. And United, obviously, Paul Pogba's is sort of back into form. I don't want to say he's back to his best form, but he certainly looks rejuvenated at least. And if McTominay plays, obviously he's come on a bit. He's looked quite good. Fred as well. Obviously, Matic knows this Chelsea side as well. There's an interesting battle in the midfield as well. So what are you looking for in terms of the key battles in this game?
You make a couple of really interesting points. I think in terms of United being dangerous, particularly in the wide areas on the transition, it just depends how the systems match up. I think if Chelsea play well, the fact that they've got kind of aging, slow defenders wouldn't be that much of an issue, because we've seen them defend well against teams with a fair amount of pace anyway. So I think pace only becomes important in this match if Chelsea don't play as you would expect them to, if they are kind of slipping in terms of how they apply their system. I think in terms of the central midfield battle, that's interesting. And again, I go back to what I said earlier about Chelsea. The way that they've been set up recently has been really impressive in midfield. They're obviously playing with kind of the two centrally and then two kind of behind the striker. And it gives them versatility. It means that they can kind of float into the half spaces. This is the two kind of number 10s if you want. So Chelsea potentially can double up on United and have technically four in there, depending on how kind of squeezed the space is. I honestly think that this is probably edging, as kind of Joe said, towards potentially a 0-0 draw. Simply because I think they're two relatively poised teams. I think Chelsea aren't that spectacular. I think this Chelsea team has a higher ceiling than the United team does. I think Chelsea, with more time, will be at a level where they can compete at a higher level. But for now, I honestly do think this is looking like they'll cancel each other out. And I think there'll be a couple of decent chances for United, perhaps on the break. I think there'll be a couple of decent chances for Chelsea. But beyond that, I think it's going to be relatively congested, kind of in the middle third of the pitch.
Yeah, it does look like it'll be sort of a tight game at least, and not many maybe clear-cut chances. Just before we move off and move to Liverpool, who Chelsea play afterwards. Ben, just quickly, I mean, Joe alluded to it, AC Milan in the next round of the Europa League. As he alluded to, they're a bit of a slump at the moment, the Rossoneri, but still they are probably one of, or arguably the strongest team left in the competition. So not an ideal draw by United fans' hopes and dreams, I guess.
Yeah, I think when I originally saw it, I thought, oh no, that is a nightmare, because I'd heard about how well they were doing, went and checked the table in the recent run of form. And like Joe said, I think it is a good time to play them. I don't know whether, I don't really know how it will kind of go. I'm not too familiar with AC Milan. What I would say is that this Manchester United team doesn't actually do too well in cup runs. They generally get to the semi-finals, but then they kind of sort of have a lackluster performance and kind of crash out of these competitions. So I'm not too sure if it is really our best bet of playing. On top of that, I think as well, Solskjaer actually just doesn't really like to rotate at all. He rotates, sort of between halves and using substitutes. He'll bring off Fernandes early, but Fernandes will still start every single game. I was shocked to see Harry Maguire didn't start the last Europe game, because he starts pretty much every game. And Wan-Bissaka, he still played a half and he's looking tired. And actually, that's one thing I feel sorry for these players a little bit, because I can actually see them on the pitch. They look exhausted. I think Fred plays every single minute of every single game now. And, they look really tired, and he doesn't like to rotate. He doesn't trust that squad enough to be able to rotate. And that would be my my only like fear as a kind of a general concern for Manchester United, they could crash out of the Europa League and then just start doing poorly in the Premier League again. And that's probably where my main worry is at. However, I think obviously, you know, we generally seem to get to the kind of semi-final seems to be the sort of time period we crash out, and it's a good time to play AC Milan. So I think it, you know, it could be a win with our strongest team. I think we could get through there, but I mean, who really knows? I think this Manchester United team is so unpredictable, and then this AC Milan team have a bit of unpredictable form. So it really, I think it's going to be an incredibly tough match to call.
Yeah, it'll be it'll be very entertaining two-leg series for sure. I'm looking forward to it. Just given yes, Milan slumped a bit, but obviously talent-wise, it's a very promising team, and obviously Zlatan going back to Old Trafford is always an entertaining subplot as well. Going to the team that can't afford to rotate because they're in a bit of an injury crisis at the back. Let's talk about Liverpool. Joe, do you like that transition, by the way? I thought that was a good one.
Good.
Yeah, thanks. This is a team that kind of blows hot and cold, Anton, as you know. See, last week it promised to be a good week because they went to Leipzig. Well, I say they went to Leipzig. They went to Budapest with Leipzig and then beat them 2-0. And it looked really, really encouraging. And then kind of crashed back down to earth with the Merseyside derby defeat. So just where are you at with this Liverpool team? Like, where are your sort of thoughts are with them at the moment?
Right. Well, I'll start by saying I am the most pessimistic Liverpool fan there is out there. I'm not the one who holds the most hope in that we will never walk alone. I can assure you of that. But I, to be honest, I mean, yes, we did come out of a 2-0 win against Leipzig, and they did play well. They were far sharper there than they had been in the Premier League in previous games. But still, the 2 goals they scored, they were not creative goals. They were just 2 mistakes that we capitalised on. I mean, I wouldn't be entirely sure that they're ready to hit ground running again in the Premier League. I mean, the last 4 games at Anfield have been losses. That's the first time that's happened since 1923, I think. And in the Premier League, it just doesn't look very good. I mean, Sheffield tomorrow could well be a point to sort of start the rebuild again. But I'm not hopeful of a game against Chelsea in midweek. I think Chelsea look quite good. On the other hand, we look, as in Liverpool, look quite sort of weak at the moment at the back. I think the wrong decisions have been made various times in the defence. We've had partnerships. I think it's like over 25 different partnerships now in the league. And frankly, I think Nat Phillips looks the strongest of them. Fabinho's out, Henderson's out, Van Dijk's out, but we can't do anything about that. Joe Gomez doesn't look like he's coming back soon. And I think from what I've seen from the defenders we have at the moment, Nat Phillips looks the strongest of them. I mean, Ben Davies, I'm not entirely sure we can incorporate him. Ozan Kabak looks good, but he's going to need time to settle in. He's made a couple of mistakes. He didn't look particularly sharp against Everton. But yeah, I'm not entirely confident of it. The front line going forward, I've lost a little bit of hope in Firmino. I mean, 2-3 seasons ago, you could say he's the one who could control every ball. He's the one who could hold up play the best. He's the one who works the hardest in the team. He doesn't look like any of those things, and he's not finishing. At the moment, Mohamed Salah looks like he's sort of containing it a little bit, but Sadio Mane looks not quite on it either. And the midfield I think, has taken a big hit by not being able to have consistent Fabinho and consistent Jordan Henderson in there. You can talk about Curtis Jones coming in and perhaps another academy signing from Liverpool, but I mean, you look at City's progression from the academy. I think Phil Foden is the main point to speak about. You know, he's a proper player they brought in there. Chelsea also have their academy youngsters that have come in, but Curtis Jones, in comparison, doesn't look half as strong as they do. And I'm concerned about how Liverpool are going to get back into shape, at least the form that we've seen for the past 3 seasons. I certainly don't see them progressing too far in the Champions League. I think they were very lucky against Leipzig, but I think the results in the Premier League speak for themselves. I mean, losses against Brighton, City, Leicester City, and Man City, and Everton, Anfield. That's more than enough to show me that the form isn't there at the moment.
Yeah, and again, and Luke, I know you mentioned your podcast about the sort of there's a sort of it's interesting the fans' mood about Liverpool at the moment, because there's obviously I feel like Anton would be in agreement. The Klopp out stuff feels a bit reactionary at the moment, but obviously, you know, it's hard to see where. I mean, you can point the sort of the slump in form to injuries, but obviously there are things on the pitch that are not going quite as well, and especially in terms of their attack as much as their defense as well. You know, the BBC did some article that sort of speculated if is there going to be sort of a bit of a clear out in the summer, maybe a bit of a transition. I don't know if that's going to be that drastic, but obviously Wijnaldum is his contract. He's yet to sign it. So it looks like he'd be leaving. I would probably speculate he's probably more likely to leave than stay. This Liverpool side, and you look at these two fixtures coming up as well. Just what are your thoughts about them? Because Sheffield United, they barely beat them last season. I think it came down to a Dean Henderson mistake, and they don't normally do too well against a bottom half team that kind of just soak up the pressure and just kind of sit back and just let them break them down. And then against a Chelsea team who we've talked about, who tactically can go toe to toe with this Liverpool team and outfox them as well. So, what are your thoughts about this Liverpool team heading into these two fixtures?
Liverpool it's just going to be one of those seasons for Liverpool. To address one of your first points, I think if Klopp were to be sacked or moved on in any way that was kind of not his own choice, the owners would face one hell of a revolt from the fans. So I just don't see how that would ever happen. I think kind of politically, given the lack of investment that we've kind of seen in Liverpool, it would be a really, really ridiculous decision to kind of move Klopp along. With reference to the next two games, of course, Sheffield United, 7:15 kick-off tomorrow, and then Liverpool versus Chelsea on the 4th of March. I think Liverpool have to beat Sheffield United. If they don't beat Sheffield United, that really would be season over. And I think they've got enough in the tank to beat Sheffield United. I think kind of looking at some of it, especially kind of Chris Wilder has said some really, really weird things recently. I know that's a slightly separate point, but I just think that if Liverpool don't beat this team, then I'd really start to worry. I think the Chelsea game is more interesting because I honestly think that Liverpool walk through Sheffield United, to be honest. The Chelsea game is interesting. The reason I think that is because we've heard a lot about Thiago being the reason why Liverpool are rubbish this year. We've heard a lot about the fact that the fullbacks, Trent Alexander-Arnold and Andy Robertson, aren't producing enough. Whether or not those things are true, it's very easy to kind of get lost in the discourse on this. But what I think the interesting thing to look out for in this game on Thursday night against Chelsea is simply that the front three for Liverpool haven't been that great this year. They haven't really clicked, and you can put that down to a number of things, whether it's the pressing not quite being there, whether it's because kind of Van Dijk's not there to play those passes. Whatever it might be, it's not been quite right. And I just think going into this game on Thursday, it's very much going to be last chance saloon for Liverpool in the Premier League this season. I'm not saying that they're in a conversation to finish in a great position, but I'm saying they're in a situation now where anything could happen between now and the end of the year, and it might be salvageable. If they lose to Chelsea, it really is over for them. So I think in many respects, this is their cup final. They'll have to be fired up for this, but it will be really tricky. And again, Chelsea, as I said earlier, look good in central midfield. Liverpool are obviously without Jordan Henderson, and I think he is one of the most important players for them, even though he's not the big name. He's not someone who you look at and you go, yeah, technically he's one of the best players on the pitch. But there is something intangible about what he does bring. He does control the game well, and he does kind of lead Liverpool on. So I think it's going to be a win and a loss this week for Liverpool. If I had to make a prediction, I think they win tomorrow and then probably lose on Thursday night.
I'm here. Sorry, just sending in a message to everyone just in the thing. But yeah, it's interesting that you say it's a cup final, because that was sort of my next question. And Ben, I was going to ask you: do you view? And I know, I mean, obviously, you know that you won't want this to happen, obviously, because you would want Liverpool out of the top four race sooner rather than later. But it does feel like these two games are sort of must win, or we're getting to that stage where they are sort of, if you don't come away with at least 4 points, 6 points optimally, they're in a bit of trouble heading into for the rest of the season with 10 or so games to go.
I think so, yeah. I think because Liverpool probably, out of those teams in and around there, they do look like the most inconsistent, the most likely to drop points. And I think that's the problem. it was interesting what Jamie Redknapp said, and I think I completely agree with him when he said that he just thinks this is a Liverpool team that are going to be up and down for the rest of the season. And I think that's exactly the case. I can't see them really putting together kind of a too strong run of form. They're just too fragile in so many different areas and too inconsistent. It was interesting because I remember me and you, Josh, spoke about before how, what do Liverpool need to sign in the January transfer market to kind of, fix their problems, an experienced centre-back or a new centre-back. And I actually said the problem with signing a sort of young and new upcoming centre-back is that just a couple of bad games and it knocks their confidence and they're almost a useless signing. And I think that's what I kind of fear is happening here to Kabak. I think, he's made some mistakes, and Alisson unfortunately hasn't really helped him there in some of those mistakes, but that often kind of leaves Kabak, a bit exposed to now a properly poor run of form and maybe even a very short Liverpool career if they don't end up buying him on a permanent deal. So I think, there's a lot of problems with Liverpool, and it doesn't look, obviously personally as a Man United fan, that really pleases me, but looking at it from a neutral point of view, it's not encouraging for them or the team. It just seems like they've almost have kind of the wind taken out of their sails. And that's what, again, I think one thing that, the perspective that I try to look at it on is not just the physical injuries and the impact they've had on the squad. The fact that this is a squad that's been so tight-knit, such a consistent starting 11, kind of rotating between 13, 14 players in a season, and then to have this amount of injuries happen, I think what that's done is it's just caused disruption, and it's an alien situation for these players. They don't really know how to cope with it. They're not used to having injuries. They're not used to playing. They're playing with unfamiliar people in unfamiliar positions. And I think it's just kind of a real mess for Liverpool. And I think it is unfortunate for them, and it is unfortunate for the fans, because I think it's not something you can, put a blame on. I think there's a lot of scapegoats and people blame Thiago, blame the injuries, blame that. But I think it's just a combination of things. And, part of that's bad luck. And then part of it's, what Jurgen Klopp's going through. Part of it's that some of the, the squad has been together for a long time now, and some of them are probably thinking about moving on. So I think there's just a lot of factors here. And I think, that leads to Liverpool being up and down for the most part of the season. And I can see them getting top four, and I can also not see them getting top four. And I think, like you said, Josh, these two games will be a massive indication probably of where I kind of make my provisional finish point for Liverpool.
Yeah, I mean, something you just said there, I'd be curious to know about the Thiago signing. Maybe it's something that won't be revealed for a while, but I'd be curious to know if Liverpool genuinely had Thiago on their watch list at the start of the transfer window, because it did appear that Thiago kind of voiced that he wanted out, maybe made some inquiries to Liverpool, and, when a player suddenly becomes available, it's like, well, yeah, of course we'd like to sign him. But it did feel like, it did sort of, if you sort of get my drift, it sort of came out of nowhere a little bit, and I wonder if Liverpool had genuinely planned for someone like Thiago to join a team, or whether it was sort of one of those situations where if a good player comes available and wants to come, then of course you sort of make those arrangements. A bit about, I did want to just, and if you forgive me, I just wanted to say a bit about Kabak. I was a bit concerned when he first signed, just because he's a 20-year-old. He's obviously coming off a team who are really poor in the Bundesliga, so there's not a lot of confidence there. And to then be asked to kind of put out these fires at Liverpool, it's a lot to ask in a new country. Obviously, he's obviously probably moved. I don't know if he lived with family in Germany, but obviously he's now moved to a different country now to adapt. And at 20, and then learning all these new defensive systems and tactics, I was just a little worried. And I was worried that, Liverpool fans sort of were hoping for too much out of him, because I knew it'd take a bit of time. He's a bit of, I don't want to say call him a project, but it is a bit of you need to invest a year or two into him to properly get him into what he could be, because he could be amazing. But it just needs a bit of time. But Joe, just to cap off the Liverpool debate discussion before we move on, I just put it to you that it's quite remarkable that the team who, were many team of the years in 2020 and looked so good for that space of time have, I don't want to say fallen off a cliff, because I do think there's obviously a redeemable center that this team could obviously come back to. But it is quite remarkable that they have, found themselves where they are at the moment.
I mean, one thing I would say about especially Thiago Alcantara is, assume, for example, that Liverpool had never signed him and they ended up with a season kind of like this. Can you imagine the amount of hate directed at FSG for not getting that deal through when he was available at such a good price, when he wanted to join Liverpool, whether or not he's a luxury player? None of us can sit here and say that we turned down the chance to have Thiago Alcantara in our teams. if he was available and wanted to join. Liverpool are incredibly unusual this year. I was quite disappointed that Roy Keane a few weeks ago didn't seem to accept the incredible mitigating circumstances against Liverpool. Losing Van Dijk is bad enough if you look at their heat maps and their pass distribution. I've already talked about how compact they have to be without a defensive core. Then they lose Matip, then they lose Gomez. Then they lose the guy who has been so incredible in midfield the last couple of years, Jordan Henderson, put him into centre-back. Then they lose him. Then they lose Fabinho. Like, it's absolutely crazy how focused the injury crisis is. Two things I will say, though, that go against this. Number one, my beloved AS Roma are facing exactly the same thing at the moment. So we'll see if we can win more games and have a better run of form despite it. Because quite frankly, if we can win without any of our starting centre-backs, then Liverpool should be available too, especially with the state of the Premier League mid-table. And no injury crisis explains two things this year. Number one, when Liverpool concede and go behind with about 10 minutes to go, you see the shoulders drop, you see the intensity go. That's got nothing to do with an injury crisis. That's a mentality problem. You saw a lot of people accusing Liverpool of being complacent after lockdown last year. I wouldn't want to go that far, but maybe it's there. And without wishing to bring the conversation down an awful lot, it does not explain what the hell has happened to Alisson Ramsdale this year. If you'd asked me about this a week ago, I would have been prepared to go through a laundry list of presumable coaching problems with Liverpool and their goalkeepers. Look at their record with Pepe Reina, Simon Mignolet, especially Lloris Karius. Recently, Alisson Becker seems to be the latest in what is now a legacy of failing to keep goalkeepers at their best. However, I don't know if any of you have seen the news coming out of Brazil, what's happened to Alisson's father. I mean, as someone who followed Brazilian Adriano throughout most of his career, I cannot believe, I do not even want to think about what's going through Alisson's head right now. If he starts the next few games and puts in good performances, especially after the last few weeks he's had and what's happened to Jurgen Klopp as well, he has the strongest mental fortitude of any goalkeeper I've ever known. Obviously, I love him because he's responsible for so many of my favourite footballing memories in recent years. But honestly, I cannot bear to think about what that man is going through right now, and it could not have come at a worse time, especially with what happened to Klopp as well. So I'm going to hold off on criticising Alisson. Muted, Josh.
Okay. Had that issue. You know what? I was watching the SU election coverage that the brilliant Raw News team did as well, and they also had muting issues. So it's not just us. But anyway, did want to say yes. Our condolences go to Jurgen Klopp and his family, and obviously to Alisson and his family as well. But it does feel like that season where what can go wrong has gone wrong, and I don't want to obviously compare to Man City last year, but obviously they didn't have Ruben Diaz last year. Aymeric Laporte was their best defender. He went down in December. I don't want to say similar to the Van Dijk thing, but certainly it impacted their defense significantly because Fernandinho was sort of the Jordan Henderson was playing at the back. And obviously you can compare how well one coped in defense to the other, but certainly it wasn't ideal to City's perspective. And then obviously De Bruyne had his injury worries as well. So maybe it is just a case of one team had an injury-free season and capitalized, and then the next season injuries came and it just struck them down as simple as that, really. But yeah, Anton, I just wanted to end with you. How confident are you of top four at the moment as a Liverpool fan?
I mean, I think the challenge can be mounted for sure. I think there's problems at the moment. I think the season's been up and down. I think, like Joe said, we can't put particular blame on Alisson at the moment. His performances haven't been great, but I think you look back the past 3 seasons that he's been there, and he's been absolutely fantastic. I think that Liverpool can put a top 4 performance together for the rest of the season, but I think it rests on the next 2 games big time. Sheffield, as we mentioned, they're a hard team to break down. We'll see where they come out with that, and then Chelsea is a question of whether they can actually compete with those top 6 teams. And I think if they can get 2 good results, at least 4 points out of these 2 games, then there's a chance. But if it's a 3 points or less, I think it's going to be a very, very difficult finish to the season for Liverpool. And they'll have to put, as in the rest of the matches would have to be absolute world-class performances, which I see being very, very difficult with the massive injury crisis they have going at the moment. But yeah, particularly without their leader, Jordan Henderson, on the pitch, as we've mentioned as well, his technical capacity perhaps isn't the greatest, but he is the leader. He's missing. And then, there's countless injuries, right? Liverpool have no centre-backs that they would have started if they had the first choice. And Ozan Kabak project still building without a proper partnership going there. So it's going to be a difficult finish to the season for Liverpool, but I think ultimately it hinges on these 2 games coming up.
Yep. And it's really depressing as a Liverpool fan to hear it, but yeah, it does, and I wholeheartedly agree. It is going to come down to how these 2 games kind of turn out. Let's just briefly go around the horn. Obviously, West Ham were in action earlier. Luke, they occupy the 4th spot at the moment, which is, I don't think you and your wildest dreams could have predicted this at the start of the season. Just how exciting is it to be a West Ham fan at the moment?
It's interesting. Like Anton, I am probably one of the most pessimistic West Ham fans that you can meet. I think I probably have slightly more cause to meet my football club with pessimism, but there we go. It's been really great. And I think today is one of the first times West Ham have played against one of these big 6 teams. And I've looked at it and I've gone, yeah, I was actually really excited to watch West Ham play today. And to pivot towards today's performance, West Ham played really well. I know they lost. I know it was 2-1. I know Manchester City probably dominated the possession stat. But West Ham played really well. To quote the XG scoreline, Man City were on, I think, 0.83. West Ham were 2.16. It wasn't West Ham against kind of backs against the wall, really solid performance. And West Ham looked good in the system they played today. The commentary team were talking about how it was kind of a system that West Ham played at the start of the season. It wasn't. It was completely different. So today, West Ham were playing in a 5-4-1 diamond. So the back 5 were Darren Randolph was in goal today, Soufal at right back, Dawson, Diop, and Cresswell in central defence with Ben Johnson on the left. The midfield 4 was really quite fluid. Rice, Souček, Lingard and Pablo Fornals, and then up front, of course, Mikel Antonio. And it worked really well. And West Ham had chances. And in the last minute of the game, Issa Diop missed. It was still a hard header, but a decent chance nonetheless. And I just look at the performance today, and I think Manchester blown teams away this year. And Manchester City are by far and away the best team in the country at the minute, and perhaps one of the best teams in Europe. I looked at that, and I kind of, as I said, I'm forever a pessimist. But I'm starting to believe that maybe a Europa League spot might be possible. And for me to be thinking that is quite spectacular, because I wrote an article, I think 2 months ago, saying how I thought the wheels were going to fall off because West Ham don't have any squad depth and our squad is too old and we don't have the right players in the right places. I still stand by that. I still don't think West Ham are the finished article. They are nowhere near that. If Antonio goes down injured, West Ham season is finished, completely finished. So that is always a risk. But if they're fit, on the basis of today's performance, there's no reason to think that kind of they're going to drop off a million miles, because they are genuinely playing very well and they deserve to be where they are in the standings at the moment. And kind of to cap it off, Jesse Lingard has been really, really good since he came in. So yeah, I think the whole looking a little bit optimistic at the moment. A significant, considering West Ham, I think the final day of the season they still could have gone down last year had there been of course a significant goal swing. So yeah, it's been a remarkable season, especially when you kind of put it in the context of the opening day defeat against Newcastle. West Ham lost 2-0 on the opening day of the season against Newcastle and then played pretty much all of the top 6. Honestly, when the fixture list came out, I thought West Ham were going to be in serious trouble. So to have the season West Ham have had is just simply remarkable, and I think David Moyes deserves a ton of credit.
Yeah, I'm not sure I'm the only one on the panel who was thinking this, but if Jesse Lingard makes the Euros team and somehow fires West Ham to European competitions next season, I will. That is something I could not have predicted at the start of the season, let alone the beginning of January. So that is truly a bit of a Cinderella type story at the moment, and I'm sure for United's perspective, Ben, is obviously really exciting as well that he's getting himself back into good form. Let's see. Leicester, second place. Obviously, disappointingly, they dropped out of the Europa League, obviously losing to Slavia Prague 2-0, which I don't think many expected. But, Ben, that might be a blessing in disguise for them, given that now all they have left is the Premier League to concentrate on. I'm not sure about the FA Cup. They might still be in the FA Cup. I'll have to check that while you answer this. But regardless, this might work out for them in terms of getting to the finish line, because I don't want to harp on Brendan Rodgers' season at Liverpool where they took him close to the title, but obviously they've sort of he's sort of had teams stumble at the finish before. This time he could have a team that get kind of confidently makes it past the finish line.
Yeah, no, and I prepared for that question, and my exact answer would be that this is a massive blessing in disguise. I think it's the best thing that could have happened to Leicester. And of course, you know, no supporter, you never want to see your team kind of crash out of a cup, but I genuinely, you know, would promise Leicester fans that that is a good thing, because I think they're really serious about a top 4 challenge this year. I think last year they were competing. This year they're actually a little bit ahead. They're at an advantage, and if they keep 2 feet firmly on the ground and don't have these European fixtures, which is a lot of games that they now don't have anymore, they can definitely go and get into the top 4 by the end of the season. I think that's fantastic for Leicester City. Obviously, best recruitment in the league. We've spoken about that so many times. They're fantastic in that department. And that's why they end up doing so well. The likes of Fofana coming in this year, Castagne doing amazing, and that's been the case for a couple of years now. So yeah, they look like a very, very exciting, very good team, very capable team, and I think crashing out the Europa League, definitely a blessing in disguise. Big Harvey Barnes fan. I think he's doing really well. James Maddison might take a little spell on the sidelines now, so it's time for him to step up even more than he has. And to just kind of allude to what you said before, if Jesse Lingard gets into this Euros team and Harvey Barnes doesn't, I will be a little bit angry, because I know Jesse Lingard's doing well, but I think Harvey Barnes is in that category of probably not going to make this Euros, but I think definitely in the future England have got themselves a good player there. So yeah, very encouraging for Leicester, very encouraging for the fans. And I think, having coped with kind of the injury troubles last year and, sort of kind of having to get through that time, they've got more depth this year. Their experience at coping with these injuries troubles is now greater since they did it last year. So I think, they really can get into the top 4 this year. I really believe Leicester can. I'd even put them ahead of Manchester United in favourites to sort of get second. They definitely look the most convincing team to me right now. So I think, it's really positive for Leicester. I think they've got a good run of fixtures coming as well. So I'm not too sure if they are in a cup. Obviously, you can confirm that in a minute, Josh, but definitely I think it's a massive, massive plus for them not being in the Europa League, since I don't think they would ever really win it. So I think it's great for them to be out of that, and now they can just focus on the Premier League.
Well, they are in the FA Cup. They're drawn against Manchester United next, so whoever wants to win the FA Cup, I guess, will put their strongest team out for that game, and whoever wants to focus on the Premier League, I guess, will rotate. Well, the team selection will kind of give away each team's incentive for the FA Cup, I reckon. A couple more. Anton, just wanted to ask you about Spurs. What are your thoughts on Spurs at the moment? Because obviously, flashback to last year when Pochettino was sacked, and the reasoning behind was Jose Mourinho is a winner. He's a manager who knows how to win, and that's what's going to get Tottenham over the hump. And at the start of the season, maybe in October, November, there were whispers that maybe Spurs are in the title challenge. Obviously, Kane before the injury looked really good. Son looked electric. And Ndombele looks really powerful in midfield. There were really strong signs there, and since then it has dropped off. Obviously, we saw in our ticker they did. I know it says 8-1 against Wolfsberger. I just put the aggregate score, the total score. So for those watching, please don't think they won 8-1. It was 2 legs. But obviously they had that. But again, that was sort of a formality, I guess. But yeah, I'm just curious to know what your thoughts are on them, because they are sort of a Jekyll and Hyde team at the moment. There's rumors that Mourinho may not continue in the job past this season. I don't know how true they are. But what are your thoughts on them? Because they are sort of a team that, I don't know, they haven't, if you look at where they were with Pochettino and where they are with Mourinho now, I don't know how much they've progressed going forward.
Well, I mean, I think they had started really well. I think initially I was worried about the sacking of Pochettino. I thought they were a really solid side under them. Obviously, they lost a bit of energy towards the end of his reign, but I understand why they appointed Mourinho. I think I don't think Spurs are playing classic Mourinho at the moment. I think they're having troubles. I think they've had inconsistencies, particularly with injuries throughout the season. You look at Kane was out, I think, in January. And obviously everybody's looking exhausted. All teams in the Premier League are looking exhausted at the moment. I think that's part of the reason why that partnership with Kane and Son has perhaps died out a little bit. So I think part of the blame is for that. I think also you got to look at the recruitment from the summer. I think Bale was expected to be the saviour and rejuvenate his career at Spurs. Yes, he had a good performance against Wolfsberger, but again, as you mentioned, that's a formality. I don't think he's quite hit the ground running. And I mean, I watched the Liverpool game, I think last month, and that was sort of what I summed up Spurs to be. You know, a standard team, sometimes turn up, sometimes give a really, really good performance, other times sort of sit back, let other teams come onto them, and then it doesn't quite work out for them. I think part of the reason that's happened is, as I say, the inconsistencies with injuries. I think defensively they've been quite solid. I think Mourinho's teams in general are quite solid. And Ndombele has certainly turned around his career in my eyes. I didn't see him as a threat last season, and I didn't really think he was going to make much of it. I think he was going to have a similar story to Naby Keita at Liverpool, but he has certainly come out and improved his position within the side this season. Looking a little bit further forward for Spurs, I think they perhaps lack that. I think getting rid of Eriksen was perhaps a bad decision. I know it's a while ago now, but I think that's lost a bit of creativity perhaps in Spurs' attacking line. But I think ultimately Spurs are the same team that they were last with Pochettino. It wouldn't surprise me if Mourinho didn't continue past the summer. It doesn't seem like Spurs progressed too much. The consistency is the same as it was in the past, and as I say, I'm not surprised where they are now with the injuries that they've had. But overall, as for me, what Spurs always has been okay.
Yeah, it's interesting to see how the narrative of teams kind of change very quickly, and especially in a sport as volatile as football. And that Spurs team, obviously, the narrative has changed a lot recently. So it'll be interesting to see where it goes from here. Joe, I'll give you the final word. I mean, just is there a team that any other team that we haven't mentioned that of late you sort of have been impressed by, disappointed by? I will put in a suggestion. I think obviously we've praised Marcelo Bielsa and Leeds throughout the season. They've had their hiccups, but I feel like of late they've sort of clicked into gear and looked really good. But yeah, what are your thoughts on any other team that we haven't mentioned yet?
Southampton look pretty dreadful. Kind of goes without saying, some of their results in recent weeks, especially considering the caliber of Ralph Hasenhüttl. I thought they were dreadful when he first came in, started getting really good, and just recently wheels have completely fallen off. It's slightly embarrassing. At the beginning of the season, I said that West Ham United were going to finish 18th. And much like when I made that prediction of Watford a couple of years ago, they're now very strongly pushing for European qualification. I probably didn't see Vladimir Sofal being, for me, probably the most important fullback in the Premier League this year, even ahead of João Cancelo. Absolutely mad link up with Thomas Souček. But I said Brighton were going to do really well. I thought they could even push for top half. That's obviously not going to happen. They've been very disappointing this year. I think the team that really not surprised me, because I sort of saw it coming, but not for the reason why, at Tottenham Hotspur. At the beginning of the season, I said they'd finish 8th, they'd have a really bad season, based more on their personnel than anything else. I didn't see any logic as to why Gareth Bale would massively improve the team. The guy's basically been a golf player for the last 2 years at Real Madrid. He represents a microcosm of what are those huge problems with giving players massive contracts, namely that A, once they have them, there's absolutely no motivation to improve, and B, if you want to get rid of him, good luck finding a team that can actually pay. He's been, as far as I can tell, a bit of a dressing room nightmare this year, which with Mauricio Pochettino he might have gotten away with, but with the special one, Jose Mourinho, obviously you're not going to. It's very funny that, as I said earlier, it seems like Mourinho's third season has come one season too soon. And although I didn't think Spurs were en route for a good year anyway, it just seems really weird how quickly the wheels have fallen off, especially defensively. And they are just like basically every other team in the Premier League this year, with the exception of Man City and possibly West Ham. No one's consistent, which on the one hand makes it very fun to watch, but absolutely maddening as an analyst to talk about.
Yep. And, it is, as I sort of alluded to the start, we all thought this was going to be a very exciting, title race. There's multiple teams in it. And like that, give it a few weeks and it's already kind of fizzled out. But it could change. Who knows? Germany, there's now a bit of a title race. Spain, there's certainly a bit of a title race, and Italy as well. So it could, and even in France as well. So it could change. France particularly, it's gone from the PSG dominate the league to now there are 4 teams that could win it. So we'll wait and see what happens. But I feel like that's a good place to leave off. I've got obviously I'll just put up there the fixtures this weekend. There's a lot of fixtures as we're recording this in 15-20 minutes time. It's West Brom Brighton. A really exciting exciting game. And I mean, the XG is going to be through the roof, I imagine. So we'll see what happens. But that'll probably do it for us. It's great to do this again and have everyone on, and clocking in about an hour and a half. So that's probably a good time to call it there. But my thanks to Anton for coming on, Luke, James, Ball Sport editor, Ben, obviously sports deputy, Joe, birthday boy, and just Raw Sport personality. And we'll be back probably next week. Let's say next week. We'll see what happens. But until then, thank you very much, and enjoy the rest of your weekend.